Formable nations can present excellent early game, mid game, or even late game goals for your nation. They tend to come with a spike in power and offer unique ways of playing the game with their combinations of mission rewards, national ideas, and access to unique events and sometimes even government mechanics. Some are famous, like Prussia being a classic Formable campaign that a lot of people try. Others are also famous in their own right. Not that many people are doing Sardinia-Piedmont campaigns, let's be honest, but the 5% admin efficiency mission is a very popular click, and hence they get to see a lot of play. And finally, we have absolute powerhouses like Russia, the Mughals, or Qing, which need no introduction. But there are also a lot of other nations that have special reasons for forming them that are much less known in the generic list of formable nations, and today I want to cover 5 of these. My criteria for this list: firstly, nothing too famous. I already mentioned things like Prussia and Sardinia and Piedmont, and you definitely don't need me to tell you that you should form Austria or Byzantium. These formables are already really powerful and really famous, and absolutely need no introduction. Next, no end tags. So these 5 should all be good as intermission formables that you can pick up on your way before your final nation formable. Finally, they are allowed to exist in 1444, but they must be a formable nation. Albania, for example, has cool unique bonuses that will last until the end of the game, but you cannot reform Albania, meaning that unless you start as Albania, you're not going to be getting those bonuses while you're tag switching around. I believe those are a reasonable enough set of ground rules, and as always, we'll be going from the least obscure and arguably least powerful, up the chain to the most obscure and most powerful formables. So with that said, let's get into the game. But before we do, just a quick pit stop to say that a like would be appreciated, and a subscription would be amazing. 45k subs was achieved, and now it's time to keep aiming high and conquer the next 1000. So let's go out there and get 46k. Anyway, enough self-shilling. The first underrated formable is going to be Poland. Now, Poland might be a surprising one on this list, and that's because quite a few people don't realize that it is actually a formable nation, and a pretty good one to pick up. I believe it mainly exists as a formable because there's achievements for playing as Mazovia and reforming Poland, so obviously it had to be a formable for that reason, but actually it's a really strong tag to just pick up as a formable, and the fact that of course Poland has further missions to become the Commonwealth, as well as that being their natural progression, means that Poland isn't an end tag. So why would you want to form Poland? After all, if you actually look at their missions, most of the really powerful stuff is locked away by either requiring the Commonwealth or just basically not being accessible to you. These 2 missions, for example, will be automatically completed if you form the Poland as someone like Mazovia. There are still some nice things to pick up, like getting the Bohemian throne and some restorations of unions and all of those things, but we're absolutely not here for some random restoration of union CBs. No. Outside of a strong recommendation to pick up Nicholas Copernicus, the actual reason that we're going into Poland is going to be for their ideas, because Polish ideas are arguably one of the best military idea groups in the game. Now, with that said, of course, Prussia is quite literally on your border, and Prussia has a lot of really strong military ideas as well. But Poland, unironically, has the strongest cavalry compatibility buff within the national ideas. So, if you're playing as a cavalry nation, Poland is an excellent formable to pick up for your ideas, and you're able to go ahead and form other nations later and just not take any other ideas, keeping the Polish ideas. As not only do they have a very strong default +5 discipline and +15 morale of armies, which make them excellent for fighting, and very much on par with nations like France and even Prussia, although they're behind by around 5% morale of armies, so not quite Prussian levels, but, you know, they're there. They still pick up 25% national manpower and 10% infantry compatibility within this idea, making it quite a strong pick, which is very well complemented with -10% regiment cost. And Wind Hussars absolutely need no introduction. Technically, there may be better idea groups for specific cavalry builds, for example within the domain of Scandinavia or Siam, but both of those are end tags as well as being a lot more famous. You've probably heard the overpowered things about Scandinavia already, you certainly don't need me to tell about them. But I think forming Poland as an intermissionary state just to pick up powerful military ideas is a pretty underrated tactic. You don't really tend to see it with countries like Zaporozhye, which could absolutely benefit from it. And I know that setting up for a formable can be quite difficult, but this is actually where I'd argue the second advantage of Poland really kicks in. See, there's a lot of Poles. Polish culture is quite a big culture itself, which makes it quite easy to flip into. Because if you actually look at all of this land, it's quite healthily developed. There's a lot of Polish people, basically, meaning that it's quite an easy culture to get 50% to actually form Poland. The other thing that's also really good with Poland is if you actually look at the simple terrain mode for Poland, the land that's actually full of Poles is basically all either farmlands or grassland, making it excellent for both development, but makes it absolutely beautiful to invade. I would actually go so far as to say that while I don't think Poland is without a doubt the best country to invade, it certainly makes the top 5 for the best invadable place in the entire EU4 game. It is an absolute pleasure to invade Poland, flat land all around, you walk right in, great development, all culture unified as Polish, just an absolute pleasure to invade. No awkward terrains, no need to get over the channel or anything like that. And indeed, if you're just going for the Polish heartland, you don't actually hit the marshes and the forests that you will see later on if you start pushing into, like, Russia proper. There are, of course, still some grasslands over here, but there is now actually defensible terrains when you start getting into the Ukraine-Lithuania areas over here, right? And, I mean, southern Poland does have some forest, but if you're trying to form Poland, you don't actually need those provinces, as those are Ruthenian. So if you are just going for Poland, this is a beautiful land to invade. It makes it a quite nice formable to get. So indeed, if you're looking for a strong military nation, even if you're not doing cavalry specifically, a nation with 25% manpower, 10 ICA, 15 morale of armies, and 5 discipline, as well as minus 10% regiment cost, is a very powerful nation indeed. But that's going to conclude Poland, and we're going to move to our next formable, which is going to be Switzerland. Now, a lot of people also don't realize this, but Switzerland is a reformable. I believe it exists so that nations like Geneva or even the 3 leagues are able to form the Swiss if you decide to play as them. The Swiss ideas are also rather famous for being really, really good at specifically mercenary things, having discipline, mercenary maintenance, infantry combatability, as well as mercenary discipline, allowing you to quite literally get 10% discipline on your mercs just from Swiss ideas alone, which is quite strong, but a Swiss mercenary build, again, you don't need me to tell you about it. You've certainly heard about it from other people before. But even if you're not doing a mercenary build, Switzerland can actually be quite a good intermission formable, and that comes down to their missions. Forming the Swiss, if you are already unstating and set up for a bunch of formables, is actually not a bad one to do on the way. And the reason for that is that the left branch of your mission tree is painfully easy to complete. You need to have a stab and have some build to force summit, practically. You need to conquer a bit of Switzerland, conquer a bit more of Switzerland, conquer a bit more of Switzerland, and then finish conquering Switzerland. And when you do all of that, which is quite literally conquer 2 states, like it's 10 provinces to complete all of these missions here, the mission Reorganize the Confederacy gives you minus 10% advisor cost until the end of the game. And that's a very neat modifier to just stack, especially if you're already going for a lot of conquering and a lot of modifier stack and a lot of nation forming. This minus 10% advisor cost stacks really well with this monument here for minus 20% advisor cost, as well as the Parthenon, which has another minus 20% advisor cost. This lets you do basically form 1 nation and build 2 monuments for minus 50% advisor cost, which lets you run your really fancy advisors a lot more just around the clock. It also has another secondary side effect, of course, is that advisor cost affects the upgrade cost of your advisors, so you'll be able to upgrade to those level 5 advisors a lot cheaper, saving you quite a lot of bulk money in the process. Another thing that's absolutely worth mentioning with Switzerland is that if you are in the area, you should also certainly consider to do Alpine Bastions, which just gives you 10% fort defense until the end of the game. It's never going to hurt you and can be quite helpful for just forcing the enemy to spend 3 extra days on every single siege tick against you. You know, it might help you prevent a fort falling if they just have to spend, throughout the course of a siege, an extra 15 days sieging you, right? That 15 days might be the difference in your army arriving in time and not arriving in time. But ironically enough, the missions Protect Against Austria and the Habsburgs finally finish off with a +5 morale of armies and +1 Yeti prestige until the end of the game, which is a neat small little buff to have on the side. Now, it's 5 morale of armies, so it's nothing too major, but it absolutely helps. And the final thing that I would say is quite an underrated part of the Swiss whole setup is the actual mission Switzerland and the Empire. Now, if you're actually in the Empire, it's a bit more annoying to do this mission, but if you're not in the Empire and you happen to be conquering this area and you conquer Switzerland, well, you just get this basically for free once you conquer Switzerland, which rewards you with 20 prestige as well as 200 diplomatic power. And this diplomatic power is great, because probably around the amount of dip points that you'll be spending to actually promote Swiss culture, and then become Swiss primary culture, and then promote and then double promote again of some other culture. Basically letting you get away with a free Swiss formable. So if you're already using half states for most of your campaign, this is going to offset a lot of this diplomatic promotion cost right away. But that's going to conclude Switzerland as our more unconventional pit stop. And with that, we move on to one of the beautiful relic nations of Leviathan. I'm, of course, talking about Hawaii. Now, most of the Leviathan over-the-top, over-broken stuff was fixed, but in many weird ways, Hawaii kind of flew under the radar because it wasn't too strong, or at least people didn't realize. A small heads up with this formable is it does unfortunately require your capital to be in the Hawaii area, so be prepared to spend a little bit of extra admin to get this one. But don't worry, you'll be richly rewarded, because Hawaii may not have the best ideas. In fact, it's a bit whatever, but we're absolutely not here for these ideas. I mean, they're not the worst. Minus 15% core creation cost is pretty useful, and naval leader maneuver pips can always, shall we say, be helpful. But we're not here for the ideas. No, we're here for this absolutely very, very full, and in some cases, recycled mission tree. There's 3 of the same icons on the exact same page. In fact, the Assemble the Army and Sunset Invasion are the same icon. Really? Like, come on. And the Polynesian Triangle and owning a trade center use the same... Okay. Anyway, my apologies. In fact, the modernization of Ishiana is a default mission. Anyway, we move swiftly on, because this mission tree, very clearly they did not know what to give you as rewards, which means this whole thing is just flooded with monarch points. What do I mean by that? Oceanic People gives you 100 dip points as well as a Morale of Navy's Advisor. Centralizing the Realm gives you 50 of each monarch point as well as 20 prestige, which if you're already capped on the prestige means that this mission gives you 70 of each mana points, meaning that you get 210 monarch points or 2/3 of a show strength from one mission. Absolute Rule gives you monthly autonomy takedown, which is a bit helpful. Loyal Subjects gives you flat 100 gov caps, so a free estate privilege just until the end of the game. Island Hopping gives you 10 global settlers, which is a bit whatever. Then you get the fun things. This mission, which just literally wants your estates to be loyal and have 30 crown land. Oh, here's one stab and another 150 monarch points. And then this mission gives you +1 to each of your ruler monarch points. Uniting the tribes, here's 75 dip points. But acquiring subjects can give you 15% dip annexation cost, which if you're timing this with a bunch of other modifiers is really quite strong to have on a non-end tag just randomly sitting here. But again, we're here for the monarch points, and it does not disappoint. Because if you unite the home area, here's another 150 monarch points again. But okay, we've got all these monarch points. We've got 150 from here. We've gotten another 75 dip from here. We've gotten 150 from here. We've gotten 210 from here, assuming max prestige. Another 60 you can get from modernization of Oceania. Surely you don't get monarch points from building to force limit, right? No, you don't. You just get morale armies and land maintenance. But assembling an army gives you some manpower recovering Yeti tradition, so it's okay. You're not getting monarch points. But if you drive out Europeans, which just means you're not a tribe and have embraced feudalism, you get 200 mil points. Which, if you form Hawaii on the way, you can absolutely just do that, and here's 200 mil. And then if you do Sunset Invasion, which means own 5 provinces in Europe, again, quite difficult if you start as Hawaii, but if you form it as someone like Austria, 300 armor points, you get a free show strength just by basically existing. It's incredible. But the thing is, of course, this mission keeps going. You can scroll down. Imperial Conquest has another 30 prestige, which gets converted to monarch points. So here's 90 more monarch points inside this mission tree. And even an extra colonist you can pick up if you're colonizing Oceania. Although, I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of colonizations. This is more of a sideshow to me. But yeah, you pick up stupid amounts of monarch points from this entire mission tree. I don't know why they were so generous with the Hawaiian monarch points. I guess if someone was going to play in this area, they're sending you a lot of the help that they can get. But it can get downright stupid. And my best example, and I would say if you are doing this at home and you're making Hawaii your intermission formable, don't actually wait for this modifier. It has a 50-year mean time to fire. And when it does, you're going to get this event called the Menehune People, basically the Hawaiian version of dwarves. And you have two options here. You can pretend they don't exist, and you gain 5 admin points. I won't recommend that option. I'd recommend you take the gamble. You have a 5% chance of winning the gamble and a 95% chance of nothing. And here's what I mean by not taking this gamble when you form Hawaii, because you're spending 50 years just to have a 5% chance of actually winning the gamble. So unless you're birding very aggressively, this absolutely isn't worth it. But if you do get the Menehune Blessing, you get +1 Monarch admin dip and mill skill until the end of the game. This is just on Hawaii. This is on the way to any other formables. This is not an end tag. It doesn't do any other resets, but that's just there. Okay. There we go. We now, on average, have a 4-4-4 rule instead of a 3-3-3. Nothing too fancy in terms of the end of the game modifiers. A couple useful things you can pick up, like dip annexation costs on the way, but, not worth calling home about. The main thing, of course, that makes this absolutely busted is the fact that it just feeds you monarch points for existing. And also really likes to reuse icons, like Oceanic People and shipbuilding. Come on, it's the same icons. And look, gain mana and prove prowess is also the same icon. Okay, you get the picture. And so is the Unite their home area and island hopping, which I guess makes sense, but still. Anyway, we are going to now leave Hawaii to get to our next fun formable nation. And that is going to be none other than England. England campaigns need no introduction. A crowd favorite for sitting on an island, pressing the dev button, scaling economically, having a big navy, and doing some colonial gameplay. But did you know that England, not Great Britain, England specifically, is a formable? And since England forms Great Britain later, England is not an end tag, which is very, very helpful, specifically because England and Great Britain share their mission tree, which allows you to pick up all of the ridiculously broken English missions and then just keep going on your way. And I think this is one of the peak examples of a really strong tag that most people don't bother forming on their way around. Like Austria is a common pit stop, Sardinia Piedmont is a common pit stop, etc. And while you don't pick up any admin efficiency within England, you can certainly make up for it. Let's start with the bottom of the tree, ironically enough, and I'm going to immediately mention English Renaissance. If you are forming England relatively early into the campaign, this mission here is going to be very helpful, as it gives you minus 15% idea cost as a modifier onto London. And minus 15% idea cost is a very strong way of saving a lot of monarch points on your ideas, and it's quite helpful in that regard. It also gives you 25 prestige, which can be converted to monarch points if you're sitting at 100%, so hey, 75 mana, you're also not complaining. You can pick up some War Score from Battles modifier, which isn't strong, but is quite cool. The Royal Marines provides a nice bonus to Marines that you definitely can't complain about. The Red Coats can give anyone plus 10 ICA, which means, ironically enough, Brandenburg into England, into this mission, into Prussia, makes quite a bit of a stronger Prussia. And you can pick up the expanding the Royal Navy to get amount of warships, which are quite helpful. With that said, though, the big stuff is going to be things like the Master of India, giving you minus 10% minimum autonomy territories and minus 10% dip annexation cost until the end of the game. Another important part of this, especially if you're going for a world conquest, which is why I'd really recommend England as a formable, is a 25 permanent power projection. This is very strong to have on not an end tag, because it means that even if you then go ahead and form another country that has permanent power projection, you can basically double dip into permanent power projection and get like 50 permanent power projection, which is really strong. And if you can combine it with a hegemony, which you absolutely would be doing, this becomes really powerful. The other part, of course, is that minimum autonomy territories is one of those modifiers that you can really stack, as taking something like expansion ideas for minus 10% minimum autonomy in territories, as well as economic hegemon for minus 20% minimum autonomy in territories, and the starting 90% minimum means that your trade companies are going to have 50% autonomy, which gets really, really strong, as those trade companies can have really powerful trade company investments, and the lower your autonomy, the more you're able to extract out of said trade companies. Of course, if you go full on modifier stacking minimum autonomy territories can get ridiculous. And let's just say, as I nonchalantly look at this weird monument inside Diviet, you can absolutely go stacking. Here's another minus 10% minimum autonomy in territories from a monument. Finally, Rule Britannia can be quite a useful bonus, as it gives you quite a lot of national sailors, as well as giving you reduced liberty desire for your vassals, which is quite neat. But the main thing of why these national sailors are quite good is because it actually makes sense for you to run Marines if you're doing Britain, because you have so many buffs to them, and they basically use a secondary pool of sailors that you're probably going to have quite a lot of. Finally, Dominate the New World is really, really strong, as it basically gives your colonies an insane production efficiency and trade efficiency bonus, as well as giving you 10% trade efficiency and 25% global tariffs, which means you could even go ahead and do tariff stacking builds. And again, this is on a not end tag. This is just an intermediary country that you can pick up, and all of these missions really require is basically colonize a bunch of the New World or take it over, which if you're going for a world conquest, yeah, that's probably something you're already doing. Of course, it's England, so there's loads of really powerful stuff, like minus 5% local dev costs on Britain if you want to go that way, and Abolish Village has another 10% dev cost mission. And hey, if you're a enjoyer of free monarch points, then the Three Kingdom Wars is a great way of getting 150 as well. But no, indeed, England sits in a really weird place where I understand why it has to be a formable, but it kind of has to be a soft end tag, I feel, or at least much like Poland, a lot of these really strong missions should really be locked away behind Britain, and not just being able to form England and then go on your merry way. But if there is one nation that has absolutely no right of being not an end tag, is meant to be locked away behind Admin 18, but really isn't, then that's going to be forming the Mamluks, which will allow you to pop certain missions that will allow you to go ahead and form Egypt without needing Admin 18. This lets you get a really early Egypt, and really early Egypt is really, really strong. So bear in mind again, the Mamluks are a formable and are not an end tag. So if you're playing as someone like Austria, you can go ahead and form the Mamluks and then pop that mission, which will allow you to form Egypt early. So what happens when you form Egypt? Well, weirdly enough, you actually take a stab hit. But stab hit aside, absolutely take the Egyptian ideas, because Egypt has 5% admin efficiency right in their opener and has +1 free policies. This is probably one of the most power creeped, busted idea sets I've seen, full stop. Not only does it have 10% dev cost permanently, which if you're going for a world conquest is a bit whatever, it has a lot of things that are actually really helpful for said world conquest. You can forget maritime ideas if you want to basically shove your navy inside a random sea tile and forget about it, as Mediterranean shipwrights means that you can now repair in coastal sea zones, taking out one of the better bonuses out of maritime and just shoving it inside of your ideas so you don't need to take it. You pick up +1 max general fire pip, which is a bit surreal, especially when combined with the land fire damage from westernizing the military, and you also get a monthly mill point, which, if you are barraging everything, is really helpful to let you basically afford to barrage everything. It's a whole monthly mill point that's just inside the idea group sitting there. It's incredibly strong. And finally, you get a free policy. That's +1 free policy on all of them. You can get an extra admin, dip, and mill policy of your choosing for free and just run it, using the Egyptian ideas. These ideas are unironically incredible, and if they tended to also include 5% discipline, they'll be great for fighting too, with the landfire damage and max general fire as well. But they don't. With that said though, 5% admin efficiency, that's available well before Admin 18 on a non-end tag nation. So after you formed Egypt, you can go ahead and form your end tags that you still want to do. You can still do Egypt into the Commonwealth, or Egypt into Russia, or Egypt into whatever you want. You can still get this 5% admin efficiency and just keep it within your ideas. See, Deccan is another option you can form that has 5% admin efficiency in your ideas, which is also not an end tag. But with Deccan, you can't avoid the admin tag 18 requirement. With Egypt you can, as you can just form the Mamluks and do the mission, which makes it even more busted. But it actually doesn't end here somehow, as Egypt has access to the Egyptian government, which enables Egyptian westernization. Egyptian westernization is a little scalar that goes up here, and basically you gain points by having monuments and having the government, and how good your ruler is affects how many points you gain. At the highest level, it can give you minus 10% tech cost and minus 5% idea cost, which is quite nice, but it tends to, shall we say, decrease the tolerance of your true faith and increase your stab cost, which can be a bit annoying, and also the estate logic equilibrium isn't great. But what is great are the buttons you can press. Studying Western administration can give you up to plus 20% governing capacity, just on top of everything else. Just here's plus 20% gov cap, enjoy. This is quite literally the same as completing administrative ideas. So yeah, once you study enough Western administration, you just get admin ideas and get it twice. 40% gov cap is really strong and I think doesn't need any introductions. Western manufacturing follows much of the same pattern, giving you plus 20% goods produced when you complete it, which is again really, really strong. This is quite literally the buff that Germany gets for being Germany, plus 20% goods produced, and this is the buff that England gets for being England, plus 20% goods produced. This is a massive economic bonus. Finally, of course, you pick up with the Western military, which gives you Western units when you can complete it, as well as plus 1 yearly army tradition as you go through it. It's one of the few ways of actually changing around your tech type. So if you start as an awkward nation that doesn't have the best military idea group, this is one of the few ways of actually changing what tech group you are using. Well, you don't change your tech group, but you change which unit type you're using. So if you're starting someone like Mahafale, you can pick up Western units using Egypt. The plus 1 yearly army tradition is also just very nice to have, and certainly not something I'll be complaining about. Finally, to really rub insult to injury, you still get access to the Mamluk missions, which are incredibly powerful. The main highlight, though, that I will have to say is going to be, unironically, you unifying Islam, because when you do, you get triple manpower increase in religious wars. To be clear of how that works, your manpower recovery, yeah, it's tripled. You get triple manpower while in a religious war, which is so stupid because it's incredibly easy to abuse. You can keep around a small little OPM that's not your religion, declare war on it, and basically just farm it for infinite manpower. This used to be given to the Ottomans, so it was unironically removed from the Ottoman ideas of being too strong, but you can still access it as just a modifier when you unify Islam as Egypt. Now, of course, unifying Islam as Egypt isn't the most trivial task, but it's certainly doable. And of course, remember, there's absolutely nothing stopping you doing something like, oh, I don't know, unify Islam, get that triple manpower increase in religious wars as a country modifier, and then go form the Mughals or something, because again, Egypt is not an end tag. I don't know why Egypt isn't an end tag. I guess there's a natural progression to form Arabia or something, but at the same time, it really should be. And I do think this is pretty well known at this point, because it's one of those things that was very much shown around when the DLC came out. But yeah, you can get cloves in your capital. Like, quite literally, arguably one of the best triggers in the game, which usually spawns in the middle of, like, nowhere on random islands that are very hard to dev, because with all due respect to Tondo, yes, it's great that you get cloves here, but you are a coastline, which is plus 15% dev cost. You can spawn it on Cairo, and Cairo is a cloth province, which I guess does disappear, but it's a center of trade which you can increase for dev cost, and it's a farmland, so you can get dev cost on your cloves. It's genuinely incredibly powerful, and again, this mission tree, it's just a gift that keeps on giving. With Egypt all said and done, though, I would like to make one last honorable mention for arguably a nation that very much does deserve the recognition, but unfortunately now has been power creeped out of existence. And I'm of course referring to Croatia. If you were around for the world conquest back in like 2019, 2018 days, Croatia was one of the more popular things to grab on your way to forming your final end tags, as Croatia fit the category perfectly of having some nice end of the game modifiers without being an end tag, but also being a nice formable. More specifically, the mission to expel the Italians gave you minus 5 years of separatism until the end of the game, which was quite helpful, and certainly is still helpful now, but probably not worth forming Croatia these days just for minus 5 years of separatism, as getting to minus 30 separatism is certainly quite doable these days, without this modifier at all. Finally, it had a nice way of picking up 200 mil points just on the way, and of course, this mission here would give you minus 5% dev cost until the end of the game. Just a nice modifier to have, and obviously if you're doing deving, that's good to see and doesn't hurt. But let's be honest, forming an entire nation for minus 5 years of separatism and minus 5% dev cost in 2025 is just downright delusional. It's absolutely not worth it. Which is kind of a shame. It just really goes to show how much this game was power creeped. Because back in the day, Croatia was one of those big Formables you pick up for that -5 years of separatism and -5% dev cost forever. With that said, that is going to be all the time I have today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to my channel members, especially Ark, Solar, W Haste, Solemon, Star72, Lord Zendikar, Nick Fassbender, Nanhatan, Nick Huss, The Awesome Rabbit, Best Pro Gaming, Grandmo Flavian, Connor, Andis Albug, Deki, Sol, Mobkiller, Anthony35, AC Napo, Glorious Leader, and Zerkis.